In this three-part video series, I'm presenting an overview of Islam's influence and intense contemporary relevance. We consider the challenge it poses, the historical forces which have given rise to Islam as we know it today, its place within a religious pluralistic society like Australia, the 5 pillars of Islam, and the 6 articles of faith. And each video ends with some biblical reflections. Now in this video, which is the second of this 3-part series, we consider the 5 pillars of Islam plus Jihad, which some add as a 6th pillar. So first of all then, let's just introduce the 5 pillars of Islam by noting that the word Islam means submission, that is submission to the will of Allah, and therefore it follows that a Muslim is one who submits, that is, he is one who submits to the will of Allah. And so we read in the 2nd surah or chapter of the Quran, "Who will turn away from the creed of Abraham but one dull of soul? We made him the chosen one here in the world, and one of the best in the world to come. For when his Lord said to him, 'Obey,' he replied, 'I submit to the Lord of all the worlds.' And Abraham left this legacy to his sons and to Jacob, and said, 'O my sons, God has chosen this as the faith for you. Do not die, but as those who have submitted to God.'" Now the way of life, or sunnah, which is required of Muslims, is based on the teachings and practices of Muhammad and interpretations of the Quran, which spell out what it means to submit to the will of Allah. And the edifice of Islam stands on 5 pillars, the fundamental expressions of submission to Allah's will. And all of these are very much aspects of visible Muslim conduct. Now just look at this pillar. It shows the 5 pillars: the Shahada, which is the creed or the confession of faith; Salah, prayer; Sawm, fasting; the Hajj, pilgrimage; and Zakat, almsgiving or charity. First of all then, let's consider the Shahada, the confession of faith. This picture shows the confession of faith in Arabic. The Shahada or confession of faith is this: "I witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." Now, as with all the pillars of Islam, this confession particularly belongs to the world of outward, external expression, for the Muslim utters this confession as a witness to others. And so, for example, after each of the 5 daily communal prayers, every Muslim present will audibly make this confession. It's the first thing a Muslim baby hears, spoken into the infant's ear by the father. And ideally it will be the last words that a Muslim will hear when he or she is dying on their deathbed. Now the emphasis is very much on the external expression, because there's nothing in the Quran which indicates how much faith a Muslim should have when he utters these words. A non-Muslim will be considered to have converted to Islam if they utter this confession of faith. And there's nothing in the Quran that indicates whether such a person needs to have genuine faith when doing so. And indeed there are some Muslims who believe that a non-Muslim who utters the Shahada automatically becomes a Muslim, even if that person was forced to do this against their will. Now understandably many Muslims react against this and would say that in order to truly become a Muslim, it is necessary for the person making this confession to do so voluntarily, willingly and sincerely. And some of them will say, well, they need to do it 3 times in the presence of a witness. Now when a person makes this confession, they're said to revert to Islam. Now that's because in the 2nd surah or chapter of the Quran, Adam is presented as the first Muslim. And so Muslims are taught to believe that all people were originally Muslims. So you become a Muslim, you're going back to Islam, you're reverting. Let's look at the 2nd pillar of Islam, Salah, prayer. And here's a picture of Muslim men performing their ritual prayers as they face Mecca. Now this pillar involves praying in a precise ritual manner at precise times, 5 times a day. There's the crack of dawn, midday, the midpoint between midday and sunset, sunset, and 1 hour after sunset. The prayers are preceded by ablutions, that is ritual washing called wudu, and these prayers must be performed in Arabic. In Muslim nations the call to prayer, or azan, is sounded by the muezzin from a tower in the mosque which is called the minaret. And Muslims face Mecca when they pray, or to be more exact, the Kaaba, the sacred stone which is the centre of veneration for Muslims. The first Muslims, like Daniel, as recorded in Daniel chapter 6, faced Jerusalem when they prayed. But according to Muslim tradition, Muhammad was ordered by God to change the direction of prayer while he was praying in a mosque in Medina. In a mosque, the Qibla, that is the direction of the Kaaba, will be indicated by a distinctive architectural feature. Each of the ritual prayers that are performed by Muslims has various stages, and each stage involves adopting particular bodily postures, for example, standing, bowing, but especially prostration being the expression of what lies at the heart of Islam, submission to the will of Allah. We come to the third pillar, zakat, or almsgiving. Now, for the Muslim, piety includes a proper use of their wealth. And so in the second surah we read, "Piety does not lie in turning your face to east or west. Piety lies in believing in God, the last day, and the angels, the scriptures and the prophets, and dispersing your wealth out of love for God among your kin and the orphans, the wayfarers and mendicants, freeing the slaves, observing your devotional obligations, and in paying the zakat and fulfilling a pledge you have given, and being patient in hardship, adversity, and times of peril. These are the men who affirm the truth, and they are those who follow the straight path." So there's quite an emphasis here upon the zakat, or this giving out of one's wealth. And the word zakat literally means increase or augment, and it refers to money that is mandatory for Muslims to give. It's often called charity, and indeed it is used to help the poor and needy and those who serve them, or to ransom captives, or to pay the debts of debtors who can't pay what they owe, or to provide hospitality for travellers. But it's also used for the spread of Islam. It is highly significant that its original meaning was purification. And the idea here is that personal property must be purified. Now, this mandatory almsgiving, or zakat, it involves giving 2.5% of capital assets, for example, gold, silver, cash, stocks, merchandise of business, livestock, and only capital assets which are continuously owned over 1 lunar year and which exceed a minimum monetary value. And if a Muslim gives above this required amount, then his gifts are called sadaqah. We turn now to the fourth pillar of Islam, Sawm, or fasting. Now, Sawm, or fasting, is required by the Quran, which specifies that this fast is to be observed for 1 month each year. And again, we read about this in the second surah. The month of Ramadan, we read, in which was revealed the Quran, a guidance for mankind, and clear proofs of the guidance and the criterion of right and wrong. And whoever of you is present, let him fast the month. And whoever of you is sick or on a journey, let him fast the same number of other days. Allah desires for you ease, He desires not hardship for you. And He desires that you should complete the period, and that you should magnify Allah for having guided you, and that peradventure you may be thankful. Now, Ramadan is the 9th month of the lunar year, And since lunar months are shorter than solar months, Ramadan occurs 11 days earlier each year. In 2020, Ramadan occurred between April the 24th and May the 23rd. Technically, the fast each day commences from when it is possible to discriminate between a white and a black thread and lasts until sunset. And during this period, it is forbidden to eat or drink. Indeed, strict Muslims will not even swallow their saliva. And also off limits are games of chance, sexual relations, and even touching a person of the opposite sex. And the purpose of the fast is to commemorate the coming of the Quran. Now, children and pregnant women, if they're in danger, or menstruating women, or travellers in the desert, or Muslims engaged in holy war, and very weak aged persons are exempt. There is a pre-dawn feast, and there's also a nightly meal to break the fast. And at night time, during Ramadan, people are allowed to eat and drink. And indeed, it's often the case that more food is consumed at this time of the year than at any other. The holiest night during Ramadan is called al-Qadr, the so-called night of power or night of decree. And this is said to be the night which is better than 1,000 months, and that's because the acts of worship done on this one night are believed to reap a reward of 1,000 months, that is 83 years. al-Qadr commemorates the time when the Quran was first revealed to Muhammad by the angel Jibreel, or Gabriel. Islamic sources state that this occurred on one of the odd-numbered nights during the last 10 days of Ramadan. And many Muslims celebrate on the 27th day of Ramadan. And some Muslims will spend the whole night in prayer or in reciting the Quran. But since there is a lack of certainty as to which night marks Laylatul Qadr, most Muslims offer extra prayers and recite the Quran on each of the final 10 evenings of Ramadan. And so we come to the fifth pillar of Islam, the Hajj, or the pilgrimage. So this picture here shows the Kaaba in Mecca being circumambulated. Now, the fifth pillar of Islam was not instituted in its final form until the farewell pilgrimage of 632 AD. And unless impossible, every Muslim is expected to make the Hajj or pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia at least once in their lifetime. And many Islamic scholars rule that Muslims can send a substitute instead. In 2019, almost 2.5 million Muslims went on Hajj to Mecca. And this Hajj occurs over a 5 to 6 day period during the last month of the lunar year. So in 2019, the Hajj ran from August the 9th to the 14th. About 3/4 of the pilgrims come from abroad, from more than 60 countries where there are Muslim communities. There are especially high numbers of pilgrims who come from countries such as Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Iran, Turkey, Algeria, Morocco, countries like that. The Hajj is an intense experience for Muslim pilgrims. It's a time when many will express their submission to Allah by uttering what's called the labbaik, literally meaning, I am here. And the Muslim addresses Allah saying, here I am, O Allah, here I am, you have no partner, here I am, verily all praise and blessings are yours and all sovereignty, you have no partner. And effectively the Muslim is expressing his submission to Allah's will when he utters the labbaik. There are a number of Hajj rituals, all of which must be performed in a state of ritual purity. And for men this includes not wearing any head covering and not using any hair oil or perfume. And this ritual purity is supposed to express moral purity. And so in the Hadith of Al-Baqari we read, and again this is the second surah, the months of the Hajj are well known, or not the second surah, the Hadith of Al-Baqari. The months of the Hajj are well known, so whoever determines to perform the pilgrimage in these months should remember that there is to be no foul talk, nor any transgression, nor any quarrelling during the pilgrimage. Now, Muslims believe that if they perform the Hajj correctly, then they will return to their homes as free from their sins as on the day they were born. All male pilgrims and most female pilgrims will wear a white, seamless garment that makes all pilgrims equal, regardless of their nationality, ethnicity or social background. And pilgrims will keep these white garments to be used when they are buried. The central ceremony involves circling the Kaaba, the cube, 7 times in an anti-clockwise direction. The Kaaba shrine itself is almost 14 metres or 45 feet high, 10 metres or 33 feet wide, and 15 metres or about 50 feet long. And this is a picture of the Kaaba. And Muslims will try to kiss or touch or otherwise greet the famous black stone which is set in the eastern corner of the Kaaba. The Kaaba itself is made of stone and mortar. The Kaaba is the holiest of all Muslim shrines, and it's believed to be the remnant of the original house of worship constructed by Abraham and Ishmael. And indeed Muslims believe that the Kaaba has been rebuilt several times before, during and after the Prophet's lifetime. After circumambulating the Kaaba, Muslims prostrate themselves at the Maqam Ibrahim, the place of Abraham, which is a stone associated with Abraham and Ishmael's rebuilding of the Kaaba. And then they drink from the well of Zamzam. And it's understood that this is the same supply of water which God once miraculously provided in the desert for Hagar and Ishmael. Now there are many other rituals the pilgrims perform. And one notable ritual is what is called the stoning of the devil. Having travelled to the city of Mina, east of Mecca, Muslims throw pebbles at 3 walls. And this symbolically reenacts what is believed to have occurred during Abraham's own Hajj, when he is said to have thrown stones at 3 pillars which represented the attempts of Iblis, or Satan, to stop him from submitting to Allah's will, when Allah commanded him to sacrifice Ishmael. Significantly, the Hajj concludes with the 3-day festival of al-Adha, when an animal is sacrificed in remembrance of how Allah stopped Abraham from sacrificing Ishmael and provided a lamb for Abraham to sacrifice instead. So those are the 5 pillars of Islam. But some Muslims add a 6th pillar, Jihad, which means struggle. Now, indeed, in the early Islamic period, it was treated as a 6th pillar by an important Islamic sect, the Kharijites. And it was one of the Kharijites who assassinated the 4th Caliph, Ali, who was the son-in-law of Muhammad. Muslims will often distinguish between what's called the lesser jihad, holy war, and the greater jihad, the struggle against inner evil. And there are those who insist that jihad primarily concerns the greater jihad, a person's private struggle to be a good Muslim. Now this is a bit hard to defend from Quranic usage, because in the Quran the word jihad is characteristically used in a militaristic way, which means that the understanding of jihad as holy war, which is quite common, is a very valid understanding. And traditionally the Islamic worldview discriminates between the so-called House of Islam or Dar al-Islam, those parts of the world where Muslims rule and Sharia law is enforced, and the so-called House of War, Dar al-Harb, the rest of the world where infidels live. And this terminology speaks for itself. There are indeed many major Muslim leaders who especially promote this understanding of jihad. Now, for example, in his book, Let Us Be Muslims, the highly influential leader Maududi, who was the founder of Jamaat-e-Islam, he states, The ultimate objective of Islam is to abolish the lordship of man over man and bring him under the rule of the one God, that is Allah. Now, while many Muslims are peace-loving, the fact cannot be ignored that Islam itself is not merely a system of beliefs and practices. It is essentially political. And all political systems must resort to violence at some level. For example, every political system has a police force and armed forces, doesn't it? And so it follows from this that at some level violence is integral to Islam, even if it is not integral to the lives of many of its devotees. And confirmatory of this is the way in which apostasy is regarded as treason. And it's common throughout the Islamic world for violence to be meted out to apostates. And throughout history, and still in many Islamic societies, apostates face the death penalty. So how can we reflect upon this from a biblical perspective? Well, first of all, let's think about the confession of faith. For Christians, the core confession is this: Jesus is Lord. And so Paul declares that if you confess with your mouth Jesus Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. That's Romans chapter 10 and verse 9. And in that same context, he goes on to quote from Joel 2:32, where we read, "Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Now, Joel was written centuries before Jesus was born, and the word Lord translates Yahweh, the most dominant name in the Old Testament by which God reveals himself. So Paul is plainly identifying Jesus with Yahweh. That is, Jesus is fully God. And of course, the Christian confession of faith, confessing that Jesus is God, is at complete odds with the Islamic confession. In order to be saved, it is necessary to recognise Jesus as God, and this implies plurality within the Godhead, though without in any way deviating from the conviction that God is one. And this is totally objectionable to the Muslims, given their mathematical conception of what it means for God to be one. Further, the Islamic confession of faith treats Muhammad, along with Allah, as the supreme object of their veneration and devotion. But for Christians, the sole object of worship is God, who has supremely been revealed in Jesus, the second person of the Godhead. So we confess Jesus as Lord. About prayer. Now, for Muslims, prayer is first and foremost ritualistic. Now, that's not to deny that for many Muslims, prayer may well also involve a genuine cry from the heart. But the emphasis in Islam on publicly visible prayer does bear some parallels with the Jewish practices regarding prayer that Jesus encountered in his day. And it was with those in mind that Jesus taught his disciples, "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." Clearly, what matters is that the person praying prays as one in such a right relationship with God that he or she can even call him Father. Now, Muslims have 99 names for God, but not one of them is Father. And indeed, the whole thought of addressing God as Father is objectionable to most Muslims. And further, Jesus makes it clear to his disciples that just as a child has ready access to a loving earthly Father, so they have ready access to their Heavenly Father without any need for special rituals or bodily positions. Jesus taught his disciples what is often called the Lord's Prayer. Now, this is the only prayer that is almost universally used by Christians in what might be considered a liturgical or ceremonial manner. And even in this case, there's some doubt really as to whether Jesus ever intended for this prayer to be more than just a set of guidelines as to how to pray. Some Christians take it that they're being commanded to use this particular prayer, but it seems very much to be just a set of guidelines. Anyway, praying for other people as an intrinsic dimension of daily prayer seems to be largely absent from the Islamic concept of prayer. And notably, it's not a part of Muslims' of the Muslims' daily ritualised prayers. By contrast, for followers of Christ, prayer very much involves praying for other people. And so, for example, in 1 Timothy chapter 2, we read, "I urge then, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercession and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness." Thinking now about the whole matter of financial giving, giving from our substance, our wealth. And like Muslims, followers of Christ are urged to be generous. And so we read in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, "Each one should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." Now, whereas for Muslims, zakat or almsgiving is mandatory, they have to do it under compulsion, for followers of Christ it is completely voluntary, not under compulsion. In Old Testament times, Jewish people were required to pay a tithe, that is, under compulsion. It was mandatory for them. Now, some Christians still emulate this practice, perhaps giving 10% of their income, but it's not under compulsion, it's not mandated. Thinking now about fasting. Well, there aren't that many references to fasting in the New Testament. When fasting does occur in the New Testament, it seems to serve more as an example to emulate rather than as something which is mandated. There's no command to fast. Jesus fasted for 40 days following his baptism, which was evidently to ready himself for the testing which followed. Sometimes fasting is used in conjunction with worshipping God. Jesus gave his disciples instructions on how to behave when they fast, and this might suggest that Jesus expected all of his followers to fast. Maybe. But then again, his remarks may just simply have reflected the fact that his disciples were Jewish and they lived a Jewish lifestyle which would include fasting. However, precisely because they were Jesus' disciples, they did not fast in the same fastidious and open way that was characteristic of their peers. And indeed we read that John's disciples came to Jesus and asked him, "How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" Because they didn't see them fasting, but they were or not. Now, in that context, Jesus said that the time would come when he, the bridegroom, would be taken from them, and then it would be appropriate for his disciples to fast. That is, to express their grief in this way, presumably. But for Christians, fasting is voluntary. And in contrast to Islamic fasting, there are no rules, there are no rituals associated with it. Now, thinking about pilgrimage. Now, for Muslims, the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, is of extreme importance and spiritual value, isn't it? And many Christians have found great value in visiting what is often dubiously dubbed the Holy Land, especially to see places which are associated with the life of Jesus and key biblical events. And such a visit or tour might be dubbed a pilgrimage, but it is a purely voluntary matter. And nowhere are followers of Christ commanded to undertake any kind of pilgrimage. The Hajj may well help Muslim pilgrims to feel part of a worldwide community, the Ummah. Just think of the wearing of the white robes, which just breaks down all the differences in nationality and ethnicity and social background. Before his death, Jesus prayed to God his Father, saying, "My prayer is not for my disciples alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you're in me and I'm in you." Now, Jesus here is anticipating the ingathering into the worldwide Christian community of people from every nation, tribe, people and language, all those who would come to believe in him through the message or the gospel preached by his disciples. Not just Jewish people, but Gentile people as well from many, many nations. And he continued by praying, "May they be brought to complete unity, to let the world know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me." Lastly, let's think about the whole matter of jihad or struggle. Now, the Apostle Paul was himself opposed and ill-treated by many, beaten severely on many occasions, and ultimately he was beheaded. The world of his day was one in which followers of Christ could expect to be opposed and persecuted, and sometimes even beaten, tortured, and killed by other human beings. I suppose we could bring this up to date. We might think about what is happening today. Well, let's use an example. Many parts of West Africa at the moment, where extremist Muslims such as al-Shabaab and Boko Haram are slaughtering Christians in considerable numbers. And it's with such opposition from hostile people that Paul, with such opposition in mind that comes from hostile people, that Paul writes to Christians in the city of Ephesus, and he tells them that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. In other words, even though in the first instance the hostility is directed against us by other human beings, we are to understand that our struggle, our jihad, if we can call it that, is not against such human beings. We are not at war with other people. Our jihad is against those spiritual forces of evil that work through human beings in an effort to move us away from our commitment to follow Jesus, to move us away from our commitment to remain true to the gospel. Now, of course, as I've emphasised, most Muslims are not hostile towards Christians. Most Muslims are peaceable. But however our Muslim friends and acquaintances may view Christians, we must not withdraw from forming friendships with them. We must not see Muslims as our enemy. And helping Muslims to grasp the wonder of God's grace in Christ will not be achieved by mouthing off against Muslims or filling the hearts of Christians with alarm, so as to cause them to isolate themselves all the more from Muslims. And that's not the way forward, that's backwards. And so we need to treat Muslims with great respect and with great gentleness. And indeed that's precisely what we're urged to do by Peter. He says, but make sure in your hearts that Christ is Lord. There's that confession again. Make sure in your hearts that Christ is Lord. Always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you about the hope you have. Be ready to give the reason for it, but do it gently and with respect.